There are nights in Hollow Creek when the air itself remembers, when the mist moves wrong, not like fog, but like breath, rising from the ground instead of falling from the sky. And if you stand near the old cemetery hill, you can hear it, that faint, unbroken hum threading through the trees like a voice that never learned to stop. They say it started on a winter night, the year no one could name. The snow had turned gray from soot, though there was no fire in sight, and in the marsh cabin, beneath the rotting beams and the smell of kerosene and milk gone sour, a child came into the world, not screaming, not crying, but humming, a single note, thin as a splinter, vibrating through the midwife's teeth, until she dropped the knife she was holding and whispered that it wasn't right. That sound was wrong. The mother's body was still, eyes open but unfocused, staring at something behind the rafters, as if she could see the old generations watching. Her blood mixed with the dirt floor, soaking into the same soil where her ancestors were buried, ancestors who had married cousins, brothers, daughters. The child was small, almost transparent, its skin pale enough that you could see the blue map of veins running beneath. It didn't move when they wrapped it in linen. It didn't blink. It only hummed, a strange, vibrating tune that carried through the walls, through the yard, out into the trees, until even the dogs stopped barking. By dawn, the snow outside had melted in a perfect circle around the house, and by noon, 3 people were dead. 1 woman found hanging from the rafters. A man drowned in the shallow creek, though it was frozen solid. And an old child, yes old, for he was 19 but looked 12, had bitten through his own tongue until he choked. The townsfolk said the hum never stopped that day. It moved from house to house like a fever, settling in their walls, in their teeth, in their sleep, and when they tried to pray, the words wouldn't come. Only that note, that one low, endless note. They buried the dead before the second night. The midwife said she wouldn't go back to the marsh house again. But she did, because the baby hadn't stopped humming, and by morning, it was humming the tune of her own family name. Which city are you watching from, and what time is it right now? If you listen close enough, closer than you should, the hum seems to follow. It drifts through generations like a curse that learned to breathe. No one knows who first called the place Hollow Creek. The name doesn't appear on any official records, not in the old county archives, not on the yellowed railroad maps that trace the Appalachian ridges like veins under dying skin. Locals say the original name was erased, struck from ledgers sometime after 1900, when the last outsider who dared to enter never came back out. The valley itself is impossible to reach by accident. Steep switchbacks lead nowhere, and the river that once marked its edge has long since changed course, leaving the hollow sealed in by mountains that swallow sound. Even the birds avoid it. They circle the rim and veer away, as though something beneath the trees hums, loud enough for their hollow bones to hear. But there are traces. An 1897 census lists 71 residents, all with the same 3 surnames, Marsh, Penrod. By 1920 there were 48, by 1935, 19, and then no record at all, not even a death certificate, not even a land deed. It's as though the town was swallowed whole, pulled back into the mountain that birthed it. Those who've gone looking say the air down there tastes strange, metallic, like old blood and copper. They say the soil is too soft, as though something beneath keeps turning, churning. And they talk about the graves, dozens of them, small and unmarked, sunken into the ground like open mouths. No church stands beside them, no cross, no scripture, just stones worn blank by rain and time. The story of the humming child begins there, somewhere in that dirt, in that buried town, where the same faces repeated across generations, until no one could tell where one bloodline ended and another began. The people of Hollow Creek believed the outside world was poison, that strangers brought sickness, lies, contamination. So they built their fences high and their families close. Too close. They thought they were preserving themselves. Instead, they were distilling, boiling their own blood down until it was no longer human. Until something else began to take shape beneath their skin. Something remembering itself too clearly. And when that child was born, the one that wouldn't speak, they said it carried every face that had ever lived there, folded into its mind like pages pressed together by time. The few letters that survived mentioned the child only once. A man wrote, "It hums when it sees me, like it knows what I am, like it's telling me I should not have been born." That letter was never mailed. It was found years later, inside a book of hymns blackened by damp, and on its final page, written in a trembling hand, were two words, "We deserve this." It was the winter of 1913 when the midwife, who was also the child's great-aunt, grandmother, and second cousin, brought it into the world. There was no doctor. There never had been one in Hollow Creek. The nearest hospital was 3 days' ride by horse, but no one there would have welcomed outsiders anyway. The Marsh family preferred to keep their births, their deaths, and their sins inside their own walls. The mother, Ruth Marsh, was 17. Her father was also her uncle, her mother, her cousin. She went into labor during a snowstorm that sealed the valley off entirely. No one could come, no one could leave. The fire had gone out hours before, but the air in the cabin was hot and wet, the kind of heat that clings to the skin and refuses to let go. When the child arrived, no one spoke. It was silent at first, still as bone, until the midwife thought it was gone. Then came the hum. A single note at first, low, trembling. Then it grew louder, vibrating through the walls, shaking dust from the beams. The women covered their ears, but the sound was inside them, echoing through the skull like a pulse. The midwife said it wasn't a cry. It was something older, something remembered. She said the pitch matched the note used in their church hymns, the same one sung at funerals before the war. But no one had sung those hymns in decades. No one remembered the words. The child's skin was gray, almost translucent. Its eyes, wide and unblinking, seemed to move too slowly when it turned its head, as though the body followed after the gaze. When it fixed its stare on the midwife, she dropped her hands and whispered, "Lord, it knows me." Because in those eyes, she saw her own reflection, small, distorted, but unmistakable. It was the same face, only folded inward, as if the bloodline itself had started turning back on her. The men waited outside, pretending not to hear the sound. They smoked, drank, and whispered that the baby shouldn't have lived. One said he'd seen a crow fall dead from the sky the moment the hum began. Another said his teeth hurt, all at once, as if the sound had shaken the roots loose. But no one dared enter. No one dared touch the child. When the storm cleared 2 days later, the snow had melted in perfect circles around the house. Black rings where the earth steamed like it was alive. The mother never recovered. By spring she was gone. And the child, the humming one, was left in the care of those who feared it most. They said it never slept. That it sat in the dark, humming through the night, staring at the walls like it could see faces there. Faces that hadn't been born yet. Faces that had already died. By the summer of 1914, the hum had become part of the valley. It could be heard in the trees at dusk, in the well water before a storm, even in the way the wind bent through the hollows. That strange, bone, deep vibration that made glass shiver in window frames. The elders said it was the child's doing. The younger ones said it was the land itself, finally speaking. The child, they never gave it a name, was kept inside the marsh house. The curtains were nailed shut. The door bolted from both sides. They fed it through a slot in the wall, and even then, they covered their ears. Because when it grew hungry, it didn't cry. It halonged. Low resonance that started in the floorboards and rose through the beams like something crawling upward. It would last for hours, sometimes days. One night, a cousin named Harlan, no more than 15, dared to peek through the nailed curtain. He said the child wasn't sitting anymore. It was standing now, though it could barely reach his knee. And it wasn't humming from its throat. The sound was coming from its chest, the ribs quivering, the skin rippling as though there was something inside, moving, breathing, singing. When Harlan told the others, they called him a liar, but 2 nights later, the humming changed. It wasn't one note anymore. It was many, layered, discordant, like a choir of voices trying to sing the same word, but never agreeing on what that word was. The dogs broke loose and fled into the woods. The livestock refused to eat, and every clock in the valley stopped, their pendulums frozen mid-swing. That was the night the Marsh patriarch, Elias Marsh, 80 years old and blind, took his shotgun and said he would end it. He entered the room and shut the door behind him. No one followed, no one dared, but they heard him speak a single prayer, then a scream, then silence. The humming stopped. For the first time since the birth, the valley went quiet. When they opened the door at dawn, Elias was on the floor, his mouth open, his eyes gone white. The shotgun hadn't been fired. The child was standing over him, silent now, tilting its head as though listening to something only it could hear. And written across the old man's chest, drawn in his own blood, were 3 words, uneven, trembling, "It knows me." After that, the family buried Elias in the garden, not the cemetery. The church refused his body. And the others whispered that he'd looked upon something that remembered him too deeply. Something that had learned him. The hum didn't return for a week. But when it did, it came from under the floorboards. And that's when they realized the sound had never left the house. It had simply moved deeper, closer to the soil. By autumn, the marsh house had become something alive. You could feel it when you walked near, the soft tremor underfoot, like a heart deep underground. The walls wept resin that smelled of old sap and metal. And in the nights when the mist came down from the ridge, you could see the boards swell and pulse, as though the house itself were trying to inhale. The child had grown, though no one could say by how much. It never seemed older, only different. The skin was thinner now, almost luminous, glowing faintly when the lanterns dimmed. It no longer ate, no longer blinked. But sometimes, when the wind pushed through the nailed shutters, the hum would rise again, longer, lower, richer. The elders said it sounded like the earth's own voice, calling something back. The family began to rot from the inside out. One by one they fell ill, gums blackened, eyes clouded, their blood turned thin as smoke. The doctor who came from the next town over only stayed an hour before fleeing down the mountain. He told the sheriff there was no sickness he could name, only a sound that crawled inside the bones. He swore never to return, inside Hollow Creek. They said the child's hum carried memory, that if you stood too close, you'd start remembering things that weren't yours. Faces you'd never seen, rooms you'd never lived in, sins you'd never committed but somehow felt guilty for. Some said the hum was trying to make them all one blood, one thought, one endless, returning thing. On the last night of November, the remaining family gathered in the cellar. They'd made their decision. The house would burn. They'd salt the ground and bury what was left. The child was sleeping, or pretending to. It hadn't made a sound in days. The midwife, her hair now white as frost, held the match with shaking hands. But when the flame touched the wall, the floorboards began to breathe. Slowly, deeply. The hum came back, not from the child this time, but from everywhere. From the beams, from the dirt, from the bones beneath the soil. It was the sound of the valley remembering itself. The fire refused to spread. The air was too thick, too wet. And then, one by one, the lanterns went out. Only the sound remained, throbbing, rising, filling the house until their teeth rattled and their vision blurred. When dawn came, the marsh house stood untouched. No smoke, no ash, but everyone inside was gone. Only the humming child remained, standing in the cellar doorway, staring toward the woods. Its lips moved for the first time, not to hum, to speak. It said a name. A name that didn't belong to anyone who'd ever lived in Hollow Creek. A name that hadn't been spoken in that valley for over a century. And when it did, the birds returned to the trees, every one of them silent, listening. They came from the outside world, 3 of them, lured by the silence. It was 1931, and the old maps still showed Hollow Creek as a mining settlement, though no mine had ever been there. The expedition was funded by a regional historical society, sent to document forgotten Appalachian communities. They never knew what that meant until it was far too late. The first to arrive was Professor Langley, a folklorist from Boston who believed the hills were haunted only by ignorance. With him came his assistant, Miss Adair, and a photographer named Wicks, whose camera never quite stopped clicking. They found the road into the valley overgrown, the air unnaturally still, no birds, no wind, only that low, barely audible hum, so faint that at first they mistook it for the ringing in their own ears. At the crest of the ridge, they saw it, a single house in a field of dead trees. The marsh house. Its windows were black, its boards warped and swollen, but the roof still stood, proud and unbroken. Langley noted how the structure seemed to exhale. A slow outward bow of the walls, followed by a sinking inward collapse. He called it an illusion of temperature, though Miss Adair swore she saw the boards pulse, as though the house was still breathing. Inside, dust hung motionless. Furniture stood exactly where it must have been left decades ago. But there was no decay, no cobwebs, no insects, no rot. Everything was perfectly preserved, as if time itself had been pinned in place. Wicks took photographs of the parlor, the hearth, the narrow stairs leading downward to the cellar. But when he tried to capture the child's room, this camera jammed. The film tore, the lens cracked. They found the first bones in the root cellar. Small gray, polished smooth, not by age, but by handling. And beneath them, carved into the foundation stone, were symbols, endless loops twisting back into themselves. When Langley tried to trace them, the hum grew louder. He said it wasn't a sound anymore, but a pressure, something pressing on the inside of his skull. Miss Adair wanted to leave. She said she'd seen movement upstairs, behind the nailed curtains, a shape, small and still, watching them through the slit in the wood. Langley laughed, the laughter of a man already afraid. He said it must be an animal, but when they checked, there was no hole in the boards, no gap, only a stain on the wall. faintly shaped like a child's hand pressed into the grain. That night, they camped beside the creek, too shaken to stay inside, and as the fire died, the hum came again, louder, closer, resonating through the water, through the soil, through their own bones. Wicks began to bleed from the ears. Miss Adair whispered that it was coming from below, not from the house, but from the ground beneath it. In Langley's field notes, recovered years later, the final page reads, "The earth is singing now." The melody is identical to the vibration of human bone when struck. Hollow Creek is not a place. It is a mouth. When rescuers found the campsite months later, only Miss Adair's journal remained. Every page was blank, except the last. On it, drawn in black ink, were 3 concentric rings, and inside them, one word written over and over until the paper tore: hum. They said Hollow Creek was abandoned. But that was a lie whispered by the archives, a convenience written by clerks who wanted the map to stop bleeding. The town did not vanish. It withdrew, folded inward like a wound closing around the infection it refused to release. By the 1940s, no one spoke its name aloud. The valley was fenced off, its coordinates erased, the government declaring it unstable terrain. But the old railroad men knew better. They said that when their trains passed the ridge at night, the metal rails would hum, softly at first, then louder, syncing with the rhythm of their heartbeat, until it was impossible to tell where one ended and the other began. And sometimes, when the fog was low, they saw lights moving through the trees. Not lanterns, not torches, just small, pulsing glows that drifted through the woods like fireflies with purpose. The few who dared approach spoke of voices carried on the wind. Not screaming, not whispering, remembering. They spoke of a place trying to recall itself. An entire town rehearsing its own ghosthood, street by street, name by name. And then there were the photographs, found decades later in the attic of a state records office in Charleston. 3 negatives labeled simply Marsh. Most were blank. But when developed, a few revealed what looked like the remains of houses sunken into the soil. Their roofs collapsed inward like closed eyes, except for one. In the final frame, the Marsh house still stood, its door open, and in the doorway, blurred, faint, a group of figures, not facing the camera, but turned away. All of them standing in perfect stillness, shoulder to shoulder, as though waiting for something behind them to speak. Experts dismissed the photo as light damage. But there were details they could not explain. The faint shimmer along the edges of the figures, the impossible symmetry in their posture, and most of all, the suggestion of movement within stillness, like breath caught mid-inhale. And when one technician increased the exposure, a new shape appeared among them, smaller, almost childlike, standing in front of the group, its head slightly tilted, its mouth open. The caption on the back of that photo, written in a hand none of the archivists recognized, read, "The child has taught them the song." After that, the negatives were sealed. But the archivists began to complain of headaches, a faint humming in their teeth. 2 went missing before the room was officially closed, and in their empty chairs, co-workers found nothing but small grey dust, arranged in perfect circles on the floor, as though something had stood there, listening. The valley was buried under a government project soon after, dams, roads, new foundations. But every year, when the floodgates are opened and the river runs through again, people say the water vibrates. Not rushing, not roaring, just singing, a song without melody, a name without language. And if you stand near the shore long enough, you'll feel it move through you, a faint hum beneath the ribs, soft as breath, endless as bone. They buried Hollow Creek. But the town remembers. And sometimes, when the river runs low, it remembers you. There are men still alive who remember the sound, though they pretend they don't. They work along the river now, in yellow helmets and government coats, their machines clawing at the mud where Hollow Creek once breathed. Every time the dam lowers its gates, the past exhales, the air thickens, the water stirs, and from below, through the silt and rusted stones, comes that same vibration, old patient awake. One of them, an engineer named Grady Locke, kept a log of the 1972 excavation. The pages are water-stained, warped from river damp, but one entry survives. Subsurface structure located at depth 14.3 meters. Timber beams still intact. No decay. Sound detected. Constant frequency, approximately 56, feels like breathing. That night, the crew heard it too. The hum rolling up through the riverbed, pressing through their boots, their teeth, their skulls. Some said it sounded like a generator buried deep below. Others said it was music. Slowed so far down that meaning dissolved into ache. The next morning, Grady's tent was empty. Only his recorder remained, half buried in the silt. The tape hissed, then cracked, then began to play the sound of rushing water, not above, but beneath. And then, faintly under the current, a voice. We were never gone. Weeks later, the project halted. Too many machines had broken, their engines choking on nothing but silence. The reports claimed unstable subterrane, but those who were there whispered that the land had refused to be touched, that it was shifting beneath their feet, rearranging itself like muscle beneath skin. The official maps now show nothing, just the widening of the reservoir, the gray smear of water where the valley used to be. But locals still talk of nights when the surface goes still, when the moon hangs low and pale over the floodplain. They say the reflection ripples in patterns, circular, rhythmic like a pulse returning. They say, if you listen hard enough, you can hear the hymn again, rising from below the dam. The same sound that once filled the marsh house, the same breath that moved through the trees, the same voice that hummed itself into being. And sometimes, though no one admits it aloud, they see shapes under the surface, a house, upright, its roof intact. Figures standing at the doorway, hands joined, heads tilted upward, as if waiting for someone to remember their names. Every generation, someone feels the pull, a researcher, a wanderer, a child tracing old maps. They follow the hum, and Hollow Creek opens for them, just enough to let them in. Then the water closes again, smooth as glass, and the sound fades back into the deep. The town doesn't haunt. It absorbs. It waits, humming its low note through centuries, teaching the earth the shape of its breath. And if you ever find yourself by the river at dusk, when the air goes still and the water goes dark, press your ear to the ground. You'll hear it. That quiet, endless sound. The hum beneath everything. The sound of Hollow Creek remembering you. End of story.